it'll cost me a little money, but when we figure it out, whatever fixes it. Right. At this point, yeah. And we have to have a record. This is on the 17th. Wait till next minute. Rain. Sheet like you do.
Rabbi, do you have to run off to a bar mitzvah afterwards?
I don't.
Okay. Long story, even longer. Galen and I, really fast, are leaving Cleveland and moving to Scottsdale to move to the kiddos. That's the short version. You'll get a full email from me when all the deeds are done. It'll be before Christmas.
Oh, seriously? Wow, we're going to miss you, Sid.
I'm going to miss all of you. But it's a health issue for both of us. We have no children here, and we're watching George Morris and a few other friends, and I said, what George has got is his family here. And, that's my life. George got me here. Okay. We got this Bible for a wedding present. Galen and I wanted to know if you had any ideas. I don't want any text form. I just want to hand it to somebody and give it in good hands.
I think the library here may very much like it.
So I could talk to Jenny Rothstein about that?
Yes, you really can.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to make sure. Carol Marshall gave me an idea. I said, did you ask your daughter if she wanted this? I said, okay.
That's another thing. Yeah. Let's try to find some time to get together before you go. Maybe the three of us will go out and have lunch together, and we'll just get caught up.
You know, I'm teaching up until the last moment. That's where the last moment is going to be chaotic, but other than that, we're waiting for a couple more things on the house, and then it'll be fun. We'll stay with my daughter and my son-in-law for a while because we're going to beat our furniture out there. We're going to get out there before it gets there, and if there's a snowstorm, we'll really beat the stuff out there.
So get it all together.
I didn't want to tell you this way, but Galen wanted me to ask you about this today. I promise you you're getting an email because I got something planned, but I got to wait till the deal is done.
Great.
Okay?
All right, Sid. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. It's been a couple of weeks since we've been together, but it's good to see you and to be back in the saddle, so to speak. So let's see now. Welcome to those who are live streaming. We're glad to have you as well. Why don't we begin with our blessing? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord, our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us with God's commandments, enjoining upon us the obligation to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. Okay, so I hope everybody has one of these sheets. This was just a kind of a quick listing of siblings and sibling rivalry issues. I'm sure it's not exhaustive, but it's plenty to think about. We may get to it today and we may not. So you might want to just take a look at it. If you have some additional siblings who are having some difficulties with one another, please let me know next week or via email, and we'll add to the list. We're certainly not going to deal with every one of these pairs, but the next topic, of course, that goes without saying at this moment, is going to be that issue, which several people have said to me is an exciting one for them. Those of us who are siblings certainly can resonate with some of the issues of sibling rivalry. And it's not insignificant that the first event outside the Garden of Eden is the Cain and Abel story, which eventuates in a murder. So it's not only interesting in its own terms, but in its placement in the Bible. So there's much to think about. So I want to go back to our creation topic. There's still quite a bit to deal with. I hope you're finding it fascinating. When we think about creation in the Bible, we think of the creation story or stories, and then the narrative continues from there, and we leave the creation issue behind. But lo and behold, we don't, because biblical authors are reflecting on it, especially in the ways in which it might impact on their own lives and understanding of the world. So I think this is a very good idea, a good example of an idea in the Torah, in the Tanakh, that continues to have resonance throughout the story. And that continued resonance illustrates the depth and the versatility that is inherent in the idea. So we're going to review quickly what we've done so far, and then we're going to go on to a couple of new uses of the creation story. So Of course, the first thing to contend with is Genesis chapter 1. And Genesis chapter 1 creates a really powerful, I might say, serene mood. The world pictured in Genesis 1 at the hands, or more specifically, at the mouth of God. God is creating through speaking, so that there doesn't need to be a lot of hammering and chiseling. It's just a matter of the ease with which God speaks the world into existence. And I think that's an element of the serenity of chapter 1. So the world that's created, I just marked down a couple of adjectives. It's coherent, it's orderly, it's hierarchical, it's purposeful. When human beings or animals are placed in this world, they can count on it being a nurturing home for them. It's a world that is consonant with some of the ideas about science. It's a world that is rational. One can understand it in terms of reason. One of the examples that we frequently use is the hierarchy of motion. The stars move in their places. The animals move from place to place. Human beings can decide whether or not to change their places. So that's a good example of the rationality, we might say, of the created universe. Okay? So if we were to look at a couple of Psalms that celebrate this universe, let's take a look at two Psalms quickly. Psalm 8, and when you find it in your Bible, some call out the page.
1114.
1114. By the way, I just pulled one of my favorite 3x5 cards out of my Tanakh and recognize I failed to thank those who have contributed to today. Digression. Thanks to Nancy Levy for sponsoring the bagels, and to Joan Levy for sponsoring live stream, and Carol for picking up the bagels. Thanks so much. All right, here we are at Psalm 8. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name throughout the earth. You have covered the heavens with your splendor. From the mouths of infants and sucklings you have founded strength on account of your foes, to put an end to enemy and avenger. So God here is renowned for having created this universe, covered the heavens with your splendor. You even are strengthened, your name is strengthened by the least of the creations, the passive infants. Okay? So one could say there's a kind of A to Z element here, that all the elements of the created world, from the strongest, the most formidable, to the weakest, reveal the splendor of God's creation. When I behold, verse 4, that your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have set in place, what is man that you have been mindful of him? Mortal man, that you have taken note of him. When I look at the spectacle of your created universe, what are we? Just a speck in this panorama. And yet you have made, verse 6, him little less than divine, and adorned him with glory and majesty. You have made him master over your handiwork, laying the world at his feet. Sheep and oxen, all of them, the wild beasts too, the birds of the heavens, the fish of the sea, whatever travels the path of the seas. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name throughout the earth. The spectacle of creation, here with the focus on human beings, who are humble, weak, And yet, God is glorified by the creation. So that's a use of the creation story in the Psalm. Let's just quickly go to Psalm 104. I don't think we'll look at all of it, but let's get started on it. It's a long poem.
Bottom of 1229.
1229. Thank you. Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord, my God, you are very great. You are clothed in glory and majesty, wrapped in a robe of light. You spread the heavens like a tent cloth. He sets the rafters of his lofts in the waters, makes the clouds his chariot, moves on the wings of the wind. He makes the winds his messengers, fiery flames his servants. He established the earth on its foundation so that it shall never totter. You made the deep cover it as a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. They fled at your blast, rushed away at the sound of your thunder. Mountains rising, valleys sinking to the place you established for them. You set bounds that they must not pass, so that they never again cover the earth. You made springs gush forth in torrents. They make their way between the hills, giving drink to all the wild beasts. The wild asses slake their thirst. Notice the purposefulness of the created universe according to this psalm. Verse 10 again. You make the springs gush forth in torrents. They make their way between the hills. Well, that may be a fact, but it also is purposeful, giving drink to all the wild beasts who inhabit those mountains. So it's not for nothing that God makes streamlets between the hills and the mountains. The birds of the sky dwell beside them and sing among the foliage. You water the mountains from your lofts. The earth is sated from the fruit of your work. You make the grass grow for the cattle and herbage for man's labor, that he may get food out of the earth, so on. Let's skip to, let's say, verse 25. Verse 24. Ma rabu ma'asecha Adonai. How great are the things you have made, O Lord. You have made them all with wisdom. So God's creative act is not only an act of will, that God decided to make the universe, but God did so with wisdom. You may remember in Plato's dialogue, the Timaeus, the demiurge looks to a blueprint, and from that blueprint creates the world. So that the blueprint, it gives evidence of a scheme, of a coherent picture from which the coherence of the universe is made. That's the idea here, that God actually has thought about, this is not just an act of will, but an act of imposing a wise structure on the earth. You have made them all with wisdom. The earth is full of your creations. There is the sea, vast and wide, with its creatures beyond number, living things, small and great, what we might call, in terms of the waters, the great chain of being, from primitive fish and so on to more complicated. There go the ships and Leviathan that you formed to sport with. Leviathan is an illustration of this idea of a sea animal that God created in the universe. Here, Leviathan is no threat at all. There go the ships and Leviathan that you formed to sport with. I think of this verse as I picture it, that the Leviathan is one of God's bath toys that God just plays with. We'll see another example, another use of Leviathan in a minute. All of them look to you to give them their food when it is due. Okay? So the various seasons give rise to various kinds of food, and the food emerges predictably from the nature of the season. Give it to them, they gather it up. Open your hand, they are well satisfied. Hide your face, they are terrified. Take away their breath, they perish and turn into dust. Send back your breath, they are created, and you renew the face of the earth. It's a beautiful and powerful poem. Some of you may know Franz Joseph Haydn's Creation Oratorio. Anybody know it? And Haydn uses Psalm 104, especially verse 28. Give it to them, they gather it up. Open your hand, they are well satisfied. Hide your face. And at that moment in the music, Haydn turns from a major to a minor mode of music. So he captures the darkness that appears when God hides God's face. So this is the notion of creation as something wonderful, something helpful, something purposeful that is carried on by these two psalms. Okay? So, as we've pointed out, in this highly serene, pacific view of the world, there are problematic elements, and these elements have been brought out by John Levinson, whose book or at least I'm using to develop some of these themes. Verse 2, there was darkness over the face of the deep. So that what we have here is an initial condition for the creation of the world. Whether this condition precedes God's action of creation, or whether this is the first thing God creates, nevertheless, it is a dark and foreboding image, right? Darkness, the face of the deep, the face of the waters. And water is a very good example of chaos, because it itself is formless. You can pour water into a vessel and give it form, but the water itself has no form. So that water is a good example of chaos. So, in a chapter which features the creation of the world, and essentially the creation of forms, animals, mountains, human beings, heavenly bodies, the creation of categories, distinct categories, which is the very definition of form, we have at the very beginning an element, or maybe two, of formlessness. So there is implied here a kind of tension between form, between universe, one thing, and what we might call a multiverse, with many different things perhaps vying with one another. Okay? So that there is a kind of dark element here in the creation of the world. Darkness and waters. What God does is God contains those waters. You remember God creates the sky and has waters above and waters below. And when we get to the story of Noah, that element, chaotic element, which has been contained but not undermined, breaks out, covers the earth, that is, covers everything that has form. If we were to look at the earth during the height of the flood, we would only see formless water, according to this picture. So that not only does the creation story contain a kind of dark intimation of chaos, almost immediately after, that is in the Noah story, that contained chaos breaks forth. which suggests that chaos always looms in the created world. Okay? So that the early chapters of Genesis create a kind of tension between primordial order and primordial chaos. And I say primordial because it seems to me the Torah here is not just talking about that event. It's not just talking about the beginning. It's talking about the nature of things. All right? So we've talked about this before. Let's just think of Abraham for a minute. Abraham is the first Hebrew. But there are two ways of understanding first, chronologically, and I might say logically. Yes, Abraham is the first Hebrew in time, but Abraham also typifies the values that Abraham's descendants are bound to bring to realization. And I often think of, say, an axiomatic system like arithmetic. We have the axioms. The axioms come first in building the system, but the axioms themselves pervade the system. Okay? So that these creation stories are not just to be understood chronologically. Here's where it all began. But ontologically, here's what it is. Here's what the universe is and will always be. And when the biblical author begins to utilize this picture, the author is assuming that this tension is always at work, and that God, in the hands of some of these authors, has the obligation when there's disorder to bring it back to order. After all, God was able to create order out of chaos. When chaos breaks forth in our lives, God can be called upon to do what God did at the beginning, bring order out of chaos. Okay? So the first element of chaos in the orderly picture of the world are the waters, which themselves are formless. And of course, as I just said, come back at the time of Noah. In other words, God contained the waters, but they're always ready to break out again. The second element of chaos is none other than you and I. God created us in God's image, and therefore we endowed with attributes similar to God's attributes. God creates worlds. We can create worlds. If you think about Genesis and Exodus as two parts of one long story, that Genesis begins with the creation of an orderly world. Exodus ends with the creation of an orderly world, namely the tabernacle in the wilderness. Just as God creates order, we create order. So that there is this arc from beginning to end of the need and the possibility of creating order out of chaos. What was the chaos before in the book of Exodus? The golden calf incident, when the Israelites break out in a kind of orgy and declare that this is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. Where did Moses go? Without the orderer, Moses, life devolves into chaos. Okay? So we have these themes from the beginning. Let's just look quickly at Genesis chapter 6 to see about the second element of chaos, and that is human beings. Chapter 6, verse 5. The Lord saw how great was man's wickedness on earth. And when we look at the chapters and the stories that precede it, we see the growth of violence and wickedness. Human beings endowed with divine attributes, so to speak, do things that create chaos in their lives. Cain kills Abel, Lamech, and so on. Verse 5, the Lord saw how great was man's wickedness on earth, and how every plan devised by his mind was nothing but evil all the time. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on earth, and his heart was saddened. This is a good example of another idea, and that is that God is not omniscient in the Bible. Here's an example of God being surprised by the results of God's creation. God didn't at the beginning feel that things were going to run aground so quickly. God regretted that he had made man on earth, and his heart was saddened. And the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the men whom I created, men together with beasts, creeping things, birds, for I regret that I made them. So at this early point in the biblical narrative, God is ready to end the enterprise. And end it not because of God's fickleness, but because the very acme of God's creation has run the process aground. Okay? So, but we know that's not the end. And it's not the end, I take it, for a couple of reasons. One of which is pretty clear, the other of which is speculative. But how does verse 8 go? But Noah found favor with the Lord. This is the line of Noah, verse 9. Noah was a righteous man. He was blameless in his generation. And Noah walked with God. The power of the single one, the power of the minority, even a minority of one, to be able to save a situation. So that this is a recovery, I think, of the idea of the charisma of human beings to be able to make a difference in the world. Okay? It looks like the bridge to the future is Noah. And here's the speculation. There is also, I'm not sure it's ever articulated, God's commitment to the process he began. God willing not to deploy merely justice. Justice would require that the evil ones be blotted out. That seems to be everyone. The Lord regretted that he had made man on earth. His heart was, I will blot out from the earth whom I created. No. Verse 5. And how every plan devised by his mind is nothing but evil all the time. And therefore that justice may suggest wiping the slate clean, maybe for good, or maybe starting again in another way. But God decides that he is not going to end the process. And if we look at chapter 9, at the very end of the Noah story, 9 verse 8, and God said to Noah, you see where I am? And God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and your offspring to come, with every living thing that is with you, birds, cattle, every wild beast as well, all that have come out of the ark, I will maintain my covenant with you. This is one type of covenant in the Bible. This is a covenant of promise. This is a unilateral covenant. There's also a bilateral covenant. The bilateral covenant has the form, I will do this for you if you will do this for me. Each party in the relationship has an obligation. The covenant of promise is merely, this is what I promise to give you, and you have no responsibility back in order to sustain the promise. In the Torah, there is another unilateral one-way covenant, and that is the gift of the land. I give you the land of Israel in perpetuity. Now the prophets begin to undermine the unilateral, the one direction of that covenant, that you have to earn your right on the land. You may remember Leviticus is 16, where the author says, the land will not tolerate injustice. And he uses a very powerful image of regurgitation. The land will throw you up and out of the land if you do not do your part of the covenant. So that though from time to time we find a unilateral, God says to Abraham, I give you and your descendants the land forever, period. But that is subject to some scrutiny by later authors, so on. It's another great theme, how the land of Israel, maybe we'll take a look at that as well. So I'm back to the Noah story. Verse 11 of chapter 9, I will maintain my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. Okay, well, that needs a little explanation. Is this just that God decides no more destruction by water, or no more catastrophic destruction, period? Is the water to be understood literally, only water, or is it to be understood metaphorically, that the chaos and the destruction created by the flood is an example of different kinds of total destruction? And so what happens here is we see the Noah story is a kind of commentary on Genesis chapter 1. That God is benign and willing to create worlds, but when chaos breaks out, everything is up for grabs. And that chaos is an element from Genesis chapter 1. So you can see that the continuing narrative through the story of Noah is a kind of extrapolation, continuation, development of the tension involved in Genesis chapter 1 between creation and chaos. Okay, so I want to turn now to a subject that we talked about the last time, and that is creation as the result of combat. When you look at Genesis 1, there is no combat. There's no struggle among, let us say, the gods, as there is in ancient Near Eastern creation stories, because God is sole sovereign and can do what God wants to do. And God does it in a way that's quite spectacular, just by speaking. Talk about sovereignty. All I need to do is to say something, and my will is done. So let's turn now for another use. That's what we're dealing with. Another way creation is utilized by the biblical author. Psalm 74. And I just want to look at verses 12 and on. Psalm 74.
1194.
Say that again?
1194.
1194. 1193. 1193 going once. O God, my King from of old, who brings deliverance throughout the land. It was you who drove back the sea with your might. You see, this is not just creation by speaking. This is creation through action, namely combat. Who smashed the heads of the monsters in the waters. It was you who crushed the heads of Leviathan. You remember we just looked at Psalm 104 where Leviathan is God's play toy in my language. Here Leviathan is a kind of enemy to God. And to create the world, God has to crush the enemy. It was you, verse 14 again, who crushed the heads of Leviathan, who left him as food for the denizens of the desert. It was you who released the springs and torrents, who made the mighty rivers run dry. The day is yours, the night also, and so on. So that this is not a serene description of creation, but creation as a battle. And if we ask ourselves, what's behind this new way of understanding creation? I think what it suggests is, in the mind of the authors, a sense that a battle is always necessary in order to establish order. There's human waywardness, there are enemies, there's the scarcity of nature. So there are, in an ongoing way, threats to order, which the psalmist, we might think, is struggling with now. So that if I'm beset with disorder, threats to my existence, and I want to have some hope, one of the ways of having hope, especially in terms of a biblical worldview, is to remember that God created order at the beginning through a battle against the forces of chaos and evil. I have experienced forces of chaos and evil. Maybe God is able to do this for me. If creation is understood merely as speaking, the serene way of creating a pacific world, that doesn't really resonate with my circumstances, where I feel overwhelmed by the conditions in which I live. I want somebody to battle them for me. And God here is represented as a warrior, I might say, who already has done this. And therefore I can call on God again. So the use of this image. Let's look back at the prophet Isaiah, chapter 51. Isaiah 51, verse 9. We're going to go back to Isaiah again in a minute. 51, verse 9. Page?
727.
What's that?
727.
727? Awake, awake. That is 728. Okay, so the author, the poet, is calling on God to wake up. Things are not going well. You are the orderer of the universe. You did this at the beginning. You are capable of helping us. Why are we in such dire circumstances? Well, one answer to that question is, God is sleeping. Sleeping on the job. Because God created order out of chaos, why isn't there order restored for us? That's a very daring thing to say to God, isn't it? I mean, it's quite clear that the author, the poet, believes in God, but the author is extremely critical of God here. More than critical, angry. Awake, awake, clothe yourself with splendor, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in days of old, as in former ages. When? Creation. It was you that hacked Rahav into pieces. In the JPS, if you have the JPS Bible, you can see footnote F, the names of primordial monsters. Okay? So this is a reference back to the creation of the world, not as Genesis 1 pictures it, but creation as combat. It was you that hacked Rahav in pieces, that pierced the dragon. Genesis 1 knows nothing of these monsters. It was you that dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, that made the abysses of the sea a road the redeemed might walk. We'll come back to that image. So let the ransomed of the Lord return and come with shouting to Zion, crowned with joy everlasting. Let them attain joy and gladness. So, we'll come back to this. But Isaiah here, known as the Isaiah of the exile, Isaiah in the Babylonian exile, is using this creation motif to ask God to come to their aid. Not just in general, I'm suffering, but specifically, I'm floundering in the depths of the exile. So redeeming the people is now going to be seen as another mode of creation. Okay, but that's to come. Let's go back to Psalms and look at Psalm 44. I think we've looked at it, but I think there's a spectacular kind of logic here.
1157.
1167?
57.
1157. We have heard, O God, our fathers have told us, the deeds you performed in their time in days of old. With your hand you planted them, displacing nations. You brought misfortune on peoples and drove them out. It was not by their sword that they took the land. Their arm did not give them victory, but your right hand, your arm, and your good will, for you favored them. Okay, so this is a reminiscence about the conquest of the land. And though the book of Joshua may suggest that the prime actors there are individuals, what the author is suggesting that really it's God who conquered the land for the people. And you did that. You are my king, verse 5, O God. Decree victories for Jacob. Through you we gore our foes. By your name we trample our adversaries. I do not trust in my bow. It is not my sword that gives me victory. You give us victory over our foes. You thwart those who hate us. In God we glory at all times and praise your name unceasingly. Yet you have rejected and disgraced us. In other words, we know what you did in olden days. And we count on you to continue to do this. We know that you're the one not only who did it, but who can do it and do it again. Yet, verse 10, you have rejected and disgraced us. You do not go with our armies. You make us retreat before our foe. Our enemies plunder us at will. You let them. This is not the enemies who are doing this. Well, yes, the enemies are the vehicle of a deeper cause. God sleeping on the job. You let them do this. You let them devour us like sheep. You disperse us among the nations. You sell your people for no fortune. You set no high price on them. It's as if the enemies can defeat the people and take them at no expense to them. They need to pay nothing. They need to pay nothing because we are worth nothing. That's how it seems to us. Why are our enemies able to take us so devastatingly and thoroughly? Evidently, God, you don't place any value on us. Because really, you are the ultimate cause on things. If Babylonians can come into Jerusalem and destroy the temple and take the people out, we must have no value. You sell, verse 13, your people for no fortune. You set no high price on them. You make us the butt of our neighbors, the scorn and derision of those around us. You make us a byword among the nations, a laughing stock among the peoples. I'm always aware of my disgrace. I'm wholly covered with shame at the sound of taunting revilers in the presence of the vengeful foe. What's the logic so far? You created order at the beginning. We know you can do it. And we believe in you. Yet, verse 10, you have rejected and disgraced us. And we're not going to leave it with that generality. We're going to go on in verses 11 through 16. and develop that theme. You sell your people for no fortune. You make us the butt of our neighbors. You make us a byword among the nations. Verse 18. All this has come upon us, yet we have not forgotten you. You have forgotten us, but we haven't forgotten you. We're living in extreme circumstances, yet we are faithful to you, or been false to your covenant. Our hearts have not gone astray, nor have our feet swerved from your path. Though you cast us crushed to where the sea monster is, the reversion to chaos, this is now a reflection of the chaos created by the sea monsters at the beginning before God tamed them and created the world. Chaos, reversion to initial conditions is always possible. And if we're suffering, our suffering is analogous to the chaos of the beginning. Though you cast us crushed to where the sea monster is and covered us with deepest darkness, water and darkness. If we forgot the name of God, you forgot us. We didn't forget you. We're still your servants. If, verse 21, we forgot the name of our God and spread forth our hands to a foreign God, God would surely search it out. And since God is searching out, since God can search out a certain reality, we are going to search out your role in this. An extremely bold poem. For God knows the secrets of the heart. It is for your sake that we are slain all day long, that we are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. We stay with you. Rouse yourself. Why do you sleep, O Lord? You've done it. We know you can do it. We saw it happen at the beginning. We remain faithful to you. You don't seem to be remaining faithful to us, but we know you can do it because you did it once. So rouse yourself. Why do you sleep, O Lord? Awaken. Do not reject us forever. Why do you hide your face, ignoring our affliction and distress? We lie prostrate in the dust. Our body clings to the ground. Arise and help us. Redeem us as befits your faithfulness. God's chesed, God's loyalty. God has the capacity to be loyal. Otherwise, we wouldn't be asking God to wake up. We're asking God to wake up because we know, for reasons we don't understand, that you're sleeping. Our situation can be ameliorated. And since you did something amazing, you created the whole world and destroyed the enemies that beset you, we're not going to let you off the hook here. You did it once, you can do it again. It's another use of the creation story, and the only allusion really is in verse 20. But I think that's the logic of this poem. Okay, so another example of the usage of the creation motif. I might say existentially, this use is not, we're reminiscing about the creation of the world. How did God do that? But that the Creator is always there to do what God did, even, especially in times of great duress and suffering. And in a sense, God has an obligation to do this. That's what they're calling him to do. Wake up and do what we know you can do. Your essence is creator. That's who you are. And creator means to put aside, to vanquish creation's opposite, chaos. And when we're beset by enemies, this is an example of chaos. You did it once, you can do it again. Candy?
You said that redeeming the people is seen as another mode of creation.
Yes.
I don't understand what redemption is.
Okay, very good. That's an awfully nice transition to our next topic. So now we're going to look at Isaiah's
You're not going to
use.
tell me what redemption is?
I'm sorry. Before the morning is over, I will tell you.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I think it's reasonably clear in this domain. So let's turn to Isaiah chapter 40. Isaiah 40, page? 698. Okay, so let me say something about Isaiah. There are 66 chapters in the book of Isaiah. The scholarship of the last couple of hundred years, maybe not quite that long, has decided that there are 3 different Isaiahs. There's the Isaiah of the pre-exilic period who chastises the people. So this is Isaiah who's living between 740 and 700, something like that. No, 640 to 600. Okay, so before the exile, Nebuchadnezzar comes beginning in 605, and then the destruction of the temple in 586, and so on. So pre-exilic, and his role is chastising the people. That these bad things are beginning to come upon you. This is not merely an accident. This is because you are not faithful to the covenant. And come back and do what you promised to do at Mount Sinai in every subsequent generation. That's Isaiah chapters 1 through 39. Chapters 40 through 55 is the so-called second Isaiah. You can see that 40 begins, "Comfort, O comfort my people." The first Isaiah is not into comforting the people, but chastising them. So under what circumstances would comfort now be required? When the people are suffering in the exile. So the second Isaiah probably lived between 580 and 540 in the exile itself. We don't know that his name was Isaiah. He certainly wasn't the second Isaiah. This is just a way of naming the apparent authors of different sections of Isaiah. First, second, and third Isaiah. Okay? So the first Isaiah 1 through 39 is the Isaiah of pre-exilic Israel, or Judah, the southern kingdom. The second Isaiah lives in the exile. And the third Isaiah, chapters 56 through 66, is the exile of the return. So that this hypothesis suggests that each of these 3 sections has a different origin, and for some reason or another they were put together. Recently, some scholars, there is a guy at Yale, I'm not sure he's still there. Who is he? Who is beginning to show, or has been showing, that there are deep connections between these Isaiahs, so that though they may have different kinds of origin, there was some kind of a hand that attempted to unify them. So it's not totally accidental that the 3 Isaiahs are together, but there is an arc of understanding that pervades the whole thing. What we're looking at now is the second Isaiah, the Isaiah in the exile. Chapter 40, let's look at verse 12. You who measured the waters with the hollow of his hand and gauged the skies with a span. A clear allusion to the creation story, isn't it? Again, who measured the waters with the hollow of his hand and gauged the skies with a span and meted earth dust with a measure and weighed the mountains with a scale and the hills with a balance? Who has plumbed the mind of the Lord? What man could tell him his plan? Whom did he consult, and who taught him? Guided him in the way of right? Who guided him in knowledge and showed him the path of wisdom? Okay, so what's going on here? I think this is an attempt to understand God's otherness, God's transcendence, God's unknowability. We can't plumb the mind of God. God can do something new. God can do something we never anticipated before. Because God's mind is not our mind. God's way is not our way. And Isaiah is laying the groundwork here for something new that God is about to do. Let's look at verse 21. Do you not know? Let me say one more thing about what we've just read. So look, the God who created the universe in Genesis 1 did what we can't do, and did it for God's own reasons. So Isaiah is utilizing this aspect of God who, 5 minutes before the creation of the world, if we were sitting with God, we would have no idea what God is about to do. Because God is not letting us in on the secret. And so something brand new is both possible and can't be anticipated from the course of things before that new action took place. The Israelites are in exile. They're suffering in the exile decade after decade. It looks like this is going to be their destiny. What Isaiah is talking about here is out of the blue. Just as God created the universe out of the blue, we couldn't have anticipated it 5 minutes before because of God's otherness, and God follows God's own plan. So too is that possible here. Something brand new can happen. Verse 21. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Have you not been told from the very first? Have you not discerned how the earth was founded? It is He who enthroned above the vault of the earth, so that its inhabitants seemed as grasshoppers, who spread out the skies like gauze, stretched them out like a tent to dwell in. He brings potentates to naught, make rulers of the earth as nothing. You see the point here? That God did something astonishing at the beginning, and God continues to do something astonishing. Not now just at the beginning, but in an ongoing way. Verse 23, He brings potentates to naught. Right? If Napoleon is coming through your land and decides to conquer it, who can stop him? Of course, Napoleon was eventually stopped, but not at the Battle of Jena, for example. So that God can even bring potentates to naught. Okay? So God can do astonishing things, makes rulers of the earth as nothing. Hardly are they planted, hardly are they sown, hardly has their stem taken root in the earth, when God blows upon them and they dry up, and the storm bears them off like straw. Who's Isaiah talking about here? He's talking about the rulers of Babylonia, and conversely we'll then talk about Cyrus, who defeated the Babylonians and will do something brand new. To whom, verse 25, then can you liken me? To whom can I be compared, says the Holy One? Lift your eyes and see. Who created these? Who sends out their host by count? Who calls them each by name? Because of His great might and vast power, not one fails to appear. This is an example in nature. I mean, when he talks about verse 23 brings potentates to naught, he's talking about history. Here he's talking about nature and how God, with ease, created the vastness of the heavenly bodies. What is it God can't do over and against this reality of creation? Why do you say, verse 27, O Jacob? Why declare, O Israel? My way is hid from the Lord. My cause is ignored by my God. Think of this existentially. Sitting in the depths of the exile with no glimmer of hope for release. But why are we saying, verse 27, why are we declaring, my way is hid from the Lord? That is to misunderstand God's capacity to understand and react even in surprising ways. 5 minutes before God begins to do this, there was no intimation that God was going to do it. But our suffering need not be understood as eternal, as ongoing. Do you not know, verse 28, have you not heard? The Lord is God from of old, creator of the earth from end to end. He never grows faint or weary. His wisdom cannot be fathomed. He gives strength to the weary, fresh vigor to the spent. Youths may grow faint and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But they who trust in the Lord shall renew their strength as eagles grow new plumes. They shall run and not grow weary. They shall march and not grow faint. Really, when you think about it, I mean, not only are these remarkable ideas, the uses. Think of Isaiah. Let's just call the author here Isaiah. Think of Isaiah sitting in his garden and reflecting on the state of his people. And he comes up with this idea. This is an idea of hopefulness, not just based on a whim. I mean, I could always say there's hope. What I can't say is that hope is grounded in something. Let's call it rational hope. There's irrational hope, right? I would love to draw a four-sided triangle. Gosh, would I love to do that. That's not rational hope. Rational hope is there's a ground for my hopefulness. And the ground here is the creation story. And therefore, Isaiah has come up with a way of comforting the people, bringing comfort to them. Chapter 42, verse 5. Thus said God the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out. I mean, I hope you're as impressed as I am by the fact that this late in biblical literature, in biblical history, the story of creation is not just something that happened back then. The story of creation has ongoing relevance to the existential condition of the people. This is the uses of this literature, of this idea, and not just a reversion back. Scott?
I'm just curious, within the chronology of the three Isaiahs, does Psalm 44 fit in there, or is it outside of that? It almost sounds like a response to this last one.
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, why not
This sounds like a response to it, is what I mean.
Well, why not think of Psalm 44? I've never thought of this question as the cry of the people in exile. Right. It need not be in exile, and this is, I like what you've said here. This may be seen, not that it was seen, as a response to, certainly a response to that kind of thing. We are remaining faithful to you, wake up. And Isaiah, sitting in his garden, is saying, God is awake. We just don't know how it's going to manifest itself. But, no, that's very good. Psalm 44 is the basis, or a basis, for the Isaiah. Patty?
I think there's a fundamental difference, though, between 44's perspective and the Isaiah chapter 40, in that in 44, there seems to be some hostility, but also total lack of responsibility. It's a very childish, to me, attitude toward God. The blame is flowing, and even though it's recognizing that the Creator has all these powers, there's no maturity in this author.
There's no maturity.
And I feel like the Isaiah has a different, same idea in terms of the creative powers, or what gives God the power to know what's going on, number one, the power to change what's happening. But that author is not asking God to make the changes. It's really, like you said, giving hope to people by saying your faith itself, your faith in this Creator is what's going to give you the strength.
Yes.
And the power in your own self. It's a much more mature response to...
It is a mature or is not? I thought you were saying it is not.
I think 44 is not.
No, it's not.
That's childish. But 40, even though they seem to be saying the same thing, the strength and the hope is really coming internally, and it's just a much more mature way, in my view, of approaching the strength of God. You're not blaming God for everything that's happening to you. You're taking some responsibility for your own, picking yourself up.
Yeah, right.
Your own actions.
Although I think, Patty, frankly, you may be a little unfair to the depth of some kinds of suffering, and the sense that they're really, I have no resources. Don't you think there are experiences like that where you just feel overwhelmed and just don't know where to turn?
I don't think the anger and blaming is going to get you out of it the same way that Isaiah's approach.
I just, again, I think it's a bit unfair to say it. I mean, I like the idea, too, of the empowerment of the people, the idea that people have some power. But don't you think Psalm 44 is about primal responses? You know, I'm leading a pretty good life. I've raised some children. I've sent them to college. I've done my duty. Why am I suffering? Why is this, I'm being overwhelmed by this? You know what? I'm angry. And I know the story of the creation of the world and the redemption of the people from Egypt and the holding the sun from setting. So what's his name? Joshua can finish the battle. And I'm angry at this God. So I'm striking out, I'm lashing out. Isn't there something very authentic and honest about that? You may say to yourself at some later, more restful point, well, maybe the anger is unwarranted or excessive, or it keeps me from acting. But as a primal reaction, I think it makes a lot of sense.
If this is a guide to how to live, I don't think.
Okay. So your response to my notion of primal is that this may not be a reflection of a moment of despair, but could be taken as some kind of a generalization. And there I think I don't know how to finish that sentence. I was going to say, I think you have a good point, but I'm wondering whether you do.
Bring your streak if you
Right.
keep attention.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, yeah, right. And it points out to me the tension, let us say, between primal reactions and secondary reactions. The primal reactions are given their due here. The secondary reactions, we might understand them as a reaction upon reflection in a moment of more quiet. And I think that's what you're pointing to as well, that there needs to be that at some point, agency of the people. Where are we? 42 verse 5, yeah. 42 verse 5. Thus said God, the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and what it brings forth, who gave breath to the people upon it and life to those who walk thereon. I, the Lord, in my grace have summoned you, and I've grasped you by the hand, created you, and appointed you a covenant people, a light to the nations, opening the eyes deprived of light, rescuing prisoners from confinement, from the dungeon, those who sit in darkness. I am the Lord, and that is my name. I will not yield my glory to another, nor my renown to idols. See, the things once predicted have come, and now I foretell new things, announced to you ere they sprout up. Sing to the Lord a new song. So God is saying that I've done the new things in the past, I can do them again. But also notice that this is giving the people yet another vocation to being a light to the nations. And I think part of what Isaiah is pointing to is how incongruous these predictions are over and against the situation of the people. We're sitting in the dungeon of Babylonia. We're sitting by the waters of Babylon. And we're hanging up our lyres from Psalm 137. How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? And we're mocked by the Babylonians. Sing us a song of Zion. How can we? So, how plausible? So let's suppose that I would come to visit those people at that moment. And I would say to them, among what kinds of things do you anticipate going forward? More of the same, more degradation, more sense of exile, the irreversibility of the defeat of our people. We were once chosen by God, but it's obvious now that God has abandoned us, and soon we will disappear. By the way, folks, I have a message for you. You are the chosen people still, and you are called to the vocation of being a light unto the nations. Really? How does that emerge from the degradation of our situation now? Don't forget, God created the universe out of nothing. There's nothing too great for God. As impossible as it seems, you are a covenanted people with a mission to bring a light to the people. By the way, the first thing God says to Abraham in chapter 12 of Genesis is that through you the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Which gives some sense that perhaps those stories were written in this context. The carrying forth now, the story of Abraham takes place literarily before this story in Isaiah, but chronologically the Abraham stories may be picking up this insight about the vocation of the people. Jim?
Well, every situation where you're calling on God's help seems to be an adversarial situation, and I don't see any question here at all is, how did we end up in this situation? In other words, if you're in charge of everything, you've created the enemy as well. Have you created this situation to make yourself more lofty so we have to come to you for the help? In other words...
Have you, God, created the situation? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, because God created the enemy. We're looking at it from our side. The enemy thinks they're right.
Of course.
Okay, God's on their side. You even see it at a baseball game. The guy gets up to bat, he crosses himself. My point is why is this continuing even right this minute, always an adversarial situation where we have to call on God's help? Is that like a setup? I'm not advocating it, I'm saying it sure seems that way.
Let me see if I'm following you. God caused this situation in order for us to find ourselves in need of God. And therefore calling
God. Directly. God's created the enemy as well as us. And here we are in this situation. God help us, which I hope he does.
Yeah.
But I'm saying the situation is a setup from the get-go.
Yeah.
It's a cycle we can't get out of.
It's this notion of a setup that I'm having a little trouble with. I mean, we know there's a tension in the Bible between God's power and human power. The story of Joseph and his brothers.
That's my point.
I know it's your point, but you remember when Joseph at the end said, "It's not you who sent me here, but God."
Yeah.
So there's that idea that I think you're promoting, that somehow God is in charge of the way things turn out. But clearly, let's just look at the Joseph story for a second. If we read that story non-theologically and just look at the characters and how they comport themselves, we get the feeling, don't we, that these are autonomous individuals acting out of their own impulses. So we don't get the feeling that the course of history is predetermined or controlled by some deity, even though the Bible wants to have it both ways. But it certainly wants to say that human beings are autonomous. So I'm not sure it's fair to say that the exile was a setup in order for something else to happen. The exile was a product, according to the biblical literature, of the people's infidelity.
Right.
They caused their own woe. Now, God is watching over the situation, and the exile is punishment by God for the actions of the people. But, and here we've got the dilemma that Patty is pointing to here. There's always this tension between divine freedom in action and human autonomy. And the Bible doesn't want to just, Robert Alter in his The Art of Biblical Literature, something like that, wants to point out that one of the things that makes the Bible special is that it does not focus merely on human volition apart from some larger sense of purpose and coherence, nor does it want to just say that things are always in the hands of the gods. The Bible works with the tension between the two. The Bible wants to affirm both human dignity and autonomy, free will, which means that we bear responsibility for the consequences of our actions, while on the other hand, not allowing themselves, the authors, to conceive of the universe as empty, that somehow there is purpose, there is a larger order, there is redemption, there is forgiveness. So I don't know that tension can be resolved, but I think that it's going too far. Let's think of the two poles of biblical literature: human freedom, divine power. And to call it a setup, I think, pushes the weight of things too far in this direction, divine power, and doesn't reckon with that the human beings have gotten themselves into this situation, but nevertheless can call upon God, who in some sense has a causal role in their situation. God called the Babylonians to exile the people, but God didn't do it, what's the word here, capriciously.
Right.
It's a response to the real act, am I right about this? The real causal force in the unfolding of history is human action. That's probably overstated. But the Bible has a great deal of respect for human autonomy, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting, that the autonomy of the enemy seems to be not only valid, but has caused this adversarial situation that we have to call on God to rectify, assuming that our side is correct, which I think it is, but maybe the other guy doesn't.
Well, you don't have to even go so far as to say our side is correct, as just to say our side is suffering.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, now, once again, I mean, one could look at what happened back then in terms of geopolitical terms, right? The Assyrian Empire was crumbling and the Babylonians defeated it, and they're trying to extend their suzerainty. And they do it by taking advantage of some weakness in Israel. On the other hand, the biblical author doesn't want the explanation to be limited to geopolitical, materialistic terms. The universe makes more sense than that. The ultimate explanation is moral, spiritual. So it's just like the issue of the 10 plagues. And authors from time immemorial have tried to understand the plagues in terms of material explanation. Why is the Nile red? Because the soil at a certain part of the time of the year spills over into the sea and the river and makes it red. Why is there a locust plague? Well, at a certain time of year, the locusts are coming and darken that. So that attempt to render a non-theological interpretation misses what the biblical author is striving for. That there is purpose, structure, coherence. Our actions make sense not only as social conventions, but also as the true way to live a life. And the true way to live a life is what emerges from God's hand. So to think of the plagues as merely materialistically understood misses the power of miracle, big and small. Okay. What I'd like to do, with your permission here, is just to go on a little bit further, because I think next week we ought to try something new. Okay? Okay? So there's more Isaiah, but I do want to turn briefly to Job. Now, turning to Job is low-hanging fruit. Who would not turn to the voice out of the whirlwind? And yet I have to confess to you that it didn't occur to me until this morning to use Job, because I got a lovely email from one person whose name is Doris that, I don't know, George, how you said it. What about Job wasn't quite that, but you alerted me without maybe wanting to, that we ought to take a look at Job. So let's do that. Job chapter 38. Job 38. Page?
1394.
1394. The Lord replied to Job out of the tempest and said, so this is chapter 38, after chapter of Job's complaining and his arguing with God. He calls God to a trial. I want to try you and see whether what you're doing to me is just. And God has been silent up to this point. And now God, in my own words, is fed up, and he's now going to respond to Job. Then the Lord replied to Job out of the tempest and said, who is this who darkens counsel, speaking without knowledge? Gird your loins like a man. I will ask and you will inform me. Where were you when I laid the foundations? Speak if you have understanding. Do you know who fixed its dimensions or measured it with a line? This is the creation of the universe. Unto what were its bases sunk? Who set its cornerstone? So we have to visualize this process of creation and its elements. By the way, I'm going to interrupt myself to answer Candy's question here a few minutes ago. Redemption here for Isaiah is new possibilities. It's liberation. It's return. It's not some life after death. This is similar to the Exodus story. That redemption means liberation and the possibility of new beginnings and new life. If I could put it spatially, redemption here is not a vertical idea. It's a horizontal one. redemption in time, in history. Okay, so verse 6. Unto what were its bases sunk? Who set its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the divine beings shouted for joy. You get the picture here? This is a mythicization of the creation process. God is creating the universe, and the morning stars are singing as a chorus in a loft of a church, right? And all the divine beings shouted for joy. You can almost picture a church service with the antiphonal, one choir and another choir, while God is creating this spectacle. In verse 5, do you know the answer to these questions? Now to 8. Who clothed, picture God interrogating Job. You're calling me to a trial. So let me ask you a few questions. Verse 8, who clothed the sea behind doors when it gushed forth out of the womb? That's a picture of God's creating the sky to divide the waters above and the waters below. Just quite plainly described in Genesis 1, here now poetically. Who clothed the sea behind doors when it gushed forth out of the womb? When I clothed it in clouds, swaddled it in dense clouds. When I made breakers my limit for it and set up its bar and doors. And said, you may come so far and no further. Here your surging waves will stop. I'm gonna say something that may sound excessive. The poet who wrote these chapters is a genius. Think of this as some of the greatest poetry ever written. Don't you think? The images to express something deeply theological. Have you ever commanded the day? And imagine Job here sitting in the chair being asked these questions. And for each of them, Job says, the author doesn't tell us what Job says, I don't know. I have no idea. Have you ever commanded the day to break? No. Assigned the dawn its place? You got me there. So that it seizes the corners of the earth and shakes the wicked out of it. It changes like clay under the seal till its hues are fixed like those of a garment. Their light is withheld from the wicked, and the upraised arm is broken. Have you penetrated to the sources of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been disclosed to you? Have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you surveyed the expanses of the earth? If you know of these, tell me. Which path leads to where the light dwells? And where is the place of darkness, that you may take it to its domain and know the way to its home? Surely you know, for you were born then, and the number of your years is many. Have you penetrated the vaults of snow? Seen the vaults of hail? I mean, where does the snow come from? It comes from the storehouses in the heavens. And when the doors are open, the snow falls. Don't give me this precipitation business. Which I have put aside for a time of adversity, for a day of war and battle. No, let's go back, 22. Have you penetrated the vaults of snow, seen the vaults of hail? So the hail can be destructive, right? Which I have put aside for a time of adversity, for a day of war and battle. By what path is the west wind dispersed, the east wind scattered over the earth, and so on and so on. Verse 31, can you tie cords to Pleiades or undo the reins of Orion, that is the heavenly constellations? Can you lead out Mazerot in its season? I don't know what that is, evidently a constellation. Conduct the bear with her sons. Can you fuss with the constellations in the sky? You know the laws of heaven or impose it its authority on earth. I'm looking for one thing here. Chapter 39. Do you know the season when the mountain goats give birth? I mean, this is a remarkable moment, I think. We might think from Genesis chapter 1 that we human beings are at the very center of things. We're given dominion. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. In a certain sense, it's a homeocentric world. God is at the center. It's theocentric. Theo, God. But Genesis 1 suggests that we are the center of the created universe. And now notice what the author is suggesting. Do you know the season when the mountain goats give birth? How could I? I never get there. I can't get to the crags where they give birth. I am not at the center of the universe. Things are happening in my universe of which you do not nor ever will have any intimation. Who are you that you are challenging me? Can you mark the time when the hides calve? Can you count the months they must complete? Yeah, how long does it take for gestation to take place? I have no clue. I mean, I could look it up now, but Job couldn't, I guess. Do you know the season they give birth, when they couch to bring forth their offspring to deliver their young? So, what do you think? What do you think the use of the creation motif is being deployed? Why is it deployed here? What is it used for here?
God's authority.
Gary?
Well, I think the point is that creation is not static. Creation is recreation over time. It's a repetitive process, and he's using it, God is using it.
Okay, so creation is not a one-time thing. It happens all the time. It's ongoing. Good. What else? Amy?
I think it makes the point that no matter what we do, whatever happens, we're always in partnership with God. There's a give and a take.
Okay.
I mean, if God had to punish us, who's reacting to who? So I think it's a fluid concept,
Okay.
but both parties are always involved.
Okay, so do you see in this passage human activity, our doing our part? That's what you're suggesting, that in a way it's a partnership. God does and we do. Do you see any human activity here?
Yeah, you're asking God to think about it and to notice it and to appreciate it and to find out a way to harness it for the good of the world.
Human activity. Okay, I frankly see Job. Job represents humanity here. And Job is, let's picture a courtroom. And God is the prosecutor. And Job is in the box as the one who's being interrogated. 100, let's look at the issue of 100% of the talk. What part of that 100% is Job talking? Zero. He's listening. Good. So maybe it's not so much that Job is active here, but that he is forced to think about his place in the universe and what he might be able to do. I'm thinking of myself at this moment as Job. I'm sitting there. God is asking me all these questions for which I have no answer whatsoever. And I'm saying to myself, what can I do? And here's my answer to myself. In the vast universe, in the vast scheme of things, I can do nothing. But you know what? Being nothing is something. Because God is forcing me to recognize my place in the scheme of things. And compared to God, it's almost nothing. But in terms of my daily life, a little humility, a little recognition that in a certain way I am nothing. You know this little joke about the rabbi and the cantor are up on the bima for Kol Nidre, and there's a reading that the rabbi and the cantor say at the beginning of this. I am little, I am nothing. And at this point when they're bowing in obeisance to God, I'm nothing, I'm very little, the gabbai comes up, the assistant, and he starts bowing too. And the rabbi turns to the cantor and says, look who thinks he's nothing. So, yeah, there may be that. There may be a sobering of Job, and by extension us, in terms of the universe doesn't rise and fall on my needs. And I have to recognize that I may be able to do some things, but I also have to be realistic about my place in the scheme of things. Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe you're right there. What else? Okay, we have to stop in a minute. But what else do you think is going on here? Candy?
I think it's an expression of hopefulness and renewal.
Oh, okay. What do you say? Something more about that?
Well, God asks us to look at the idea of birth, which is the hugest creation that he expresses. And anybody that's held a newborn baby in their arms understands the miracle of it, the hopefulness of what that child will become, and the cycle of renewal that happens not because of us, but because of whatever God is.
So it's appreciation for the way things work, especially the way things are birthed and created, the spectacle.
Even if you understand all the medical things about it, it doesn't, the spark of life is amazing.
Yeah, good. So the appreciation, I like that. Stuart?
Thinking about what Job's answer would be, I wasn't present at the creation. I wasn't present for all these things that you're talking about. But now, in the present time, I'm calling on you to be moral, which is a very powerful, very different aspect.
And you think the Job of these chapters is calling upon God to be moral? I mean, I see Job as being overwhelmed here. He does call on God to be moral earlier.
Yeah.
But here, God seems to be saying to him, who are you to call me to your standards? And Job's answer is, you may be right.
No, I think Job is responding at the present time.
In these chapters?
Yes. At the present time, I'm calling on you to act morally. I wasn't present for any of these things that you're talking about, but now I think things are very different.
And what's when is now? Is now the chapters before 38, or is now during this conversation?
During this conversation.
During this conversation. You think during this conversation Job is calling upon God to be moral? Because what God is telling him has nothing to do with values. It has to do with reality. This is what is real. And you've had nothing to do with it. And by the way, in chapter 42, let me just send you there for a second. So Job said in reply to the Lord, I know that you can do everything, that nothing you propose is impossible for you. Who is this who obscures counsel without knowledge? Yeah. Indeed, I spoke without understanding of things beyond me, which I didn't know. Hear now, and I will speak. I will ask, and you will inform me. I've heard you with my ears. Now I see you with my eyes. Therefore, I recant and relent, being but dust and ashes. I think what Job is saying here is, and maybe it's implicit in the very first creation story, is that God is transcendent, that God's wisdom and will has nothing to do with our wisdom and will. That God, you see, Psalm 44 asks that God serve us. That God's vocation is to respond when I say, stop sleeping. That very idea compromises God's otherness. That suggests that in some way, God is a vehicle for our well-being. Or God somehow has as a vocation to think hard about what we need. Who's ever thinking about my needs is putting me at the center of things. How dare we ask God to wake up because I'm suffering? So, it's a human proclivity. We do cry out. But if we're asking ourselves, what is monotheism at its base? If God is required to respond to me, then God's otherness is compromised by being seen as a vehicle. In a way, we could say that these chapters in the book of Job is the purest form of monotheism in the entire Bible. God in God's onlyness transcends, finally, my needs, my concerns. Now that may be, it sounds harsh. In a way, it's not real religion. No. In some ways, it's not religion as we understand it, where we are involved, those who believe in God, that God is involved in our lives. God can be called upon. God will respond when we call. That is what religion is, but it may not be pure monotheism if we think of God as serving us. That's what I think Job is working on here, the book of Job. What does it really mean to embrace a monotheism? God's otherness, God is not like us, God is not responsible to us. It's a challenge to religion. In a way, this is the outer edge of reflection on monotheism. And maybe the outer edge, the extreme of reflection on God is not palatable to those who think of religion in terms of covenant, of interrelationship, and so on. I'm stammering here. I feel that I've not gotten to it yet. But there is something very austere about, we ask ourselves, who's at the center of the universe? And I think the Bible, as I've suggested in response to Jim, that really there are two centers. There's God and there's human beings. But monotheism wants to suggest in its purity there's only one center. So, you know what an asymptote is? An asymptote is a line that approaches infinity but never gets there. And maybe Job is that line leaving the religion of us human beings behind and approaching infinity. I see a tension there between Job's idea and our idea. But I love the fact that the Bible contains this very